说你传到哪里？你传正给我，我你传给我就行。
My name is John Liu. I am the host of the day. I'm a professor at National Taiwan University. And today I'm very happy to be here to chair this session on decarbonizing the chips, challenges to ensure the semiconductor industry toward net zero. This is a hybrid event, so I would also like to extend a welcome to the people who participate online. So good evening in Taiwan and maybe good afternoon in somewhere else in the world. Right, so very happy to be here. And first of all, just some housekeeping issues, right? So this is an interesting space, and we have Taiwanese snacks in the back. You don't have to wait until the event is finished to enjoy the snack. Restrooms are here and there. And then after the event, we also hope that you can stay a little bit to mingle, to network, and to get to know each other, to have some further discussions. So that's kind of the setup of the day. And so I'll begin by just giving you a little bit background of this event. So this event is organized by the Taiwan Climate Action Network. This is a A new network formed about 2 years ago by a collection of Taiwanese environmental NGOs. And they've been working in this area for 10, 20 years. And this is also the first time a Taiwanese organization has participated in the New York Climate Week. So TCAN already organized one event earlier this week on Tuesday, and today is the final one on semiconductor. Right? So I think it's a very, for Taiwanese groups, this is a milestone that folks travel all the way from Taipei to be here to share with you our perspectives. Okay, so I'll give you a brief, before we delve into the three presentations, I'll give you some background on our presenters. So our first presentation will be done by Dr. Jiawei Zhao and Dr. Chi-Hong Liu. And Dr. Jiawei Zhao is the research director of the Taiwan Climate Action Network, based in Taipei. Dr. Liu is economist at Taiwan Political Economy Collaborative. This is a think tank also based in Taiwan. And they will be giving us about 20 minutes of presentation. And then we'll move on to Julia Christina Hess right here. And she is a senior policy researcher at the Interbase based in Berlin. And finally, she will be giving us about 15 minutes of presentation. And lastly, we will have Gary Cook. He is a climate and renewable energy strategist, and he's also the author of Clean Clicks or Dirty Chips, and he will be joining us online, right? Also for a presentation about 15 minutes. That will be the presentations that will also leave us quite enough time for the discussion. And so for the people in the room, we welcome you to propose questions and have vibrant discussions. But since it's a hybrid event, we also have a Slido up there already. And for people who watch the live stream, please welcome to share your questions through the Slido, and I'll be kind of reading them out loud from here. Right. So that's the setup of the day. Okay, so again, welcome everyone. And without further ado, I will invite the first speaker, Dr. Zhao, to give us presentations. Thank you.
Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to join our event. So for us, it's kind of like the very last event that we will have in English during this busy week. So I was going to present primarily finding of our of the ongoing research that focuses on to provide a strategic climate assessment of the semiconductor industry in Taiwan. And this work is done not just by the Taiwan Climate Action Network, but also with the Taiwan Political Economy Collaborative. So let me give you a reason. Sorry, voice cannot move it. Okay. Yeah, so let's talk about first I would let you know now why we need this kind of strategic climate assessment. Because if we are looking into the climate implication for the expansion of the semiconductor industry in Taiwan, we have to see kind of like a ecological consequence for that. Because if we see looking into the change of the electricity consumption after Paris Agreement, we can see that the overall electronic industry they are contribute around 58% of the total power consumption increase for during the last from 2050 to 2022. And then if we look in for the TSMC, actually this company also contributed around 40% of those growth. Their power consumption doubled within those 7 years. And then but nowadays we are talking about electrify. We are thinking of the increase of the power demand. In other means that the increase of the GHG of the carbon emission But if we look into the change of the fossil-related CO2 emissions after the Paris Agreement in Taiwan, the good news is that actually our fossil-related CO2 emission is not increasing. We are decreasing a little bit. But if we are looking into the contribution from different sector, we can find out that the electronic industry, they are kind of like they are the solely industry who have a very significant growth in those years. And the TSMC as this company, they contribute around 80% of this growth within the electronic industry. So later, when we talk about climate change issue, we still have to talk about the TSMC. We have to talk about the semiconductor right now. Because nowadays the TSMC, they are ranked as the number 3 major emitters in Taiwan. So that's the kind of like a background to let you know. In the other aspect, when in Taiwan now we are talking about the ESG, and everybody will say, TSMC or semiconductor industry, they are the kind of like the corporate citizen in Taiwan. They are the model for the corporate social responsibility. But if we look into their commitments in terms of the emission reduction target, we can find out that all the 12 companies within our semiconductor supply chain, they're all committed to the net zero. But for the TSMC, for their 2030 emission reduction target, is kind of like they are working with just come back to a normal thing. So they will see a very fast expansion until and then see the reduction after 2027 and 2028, and come back to the level of the 2020. So it's kind of like their commitments. They made a net zero commitment, but their midterm commitments that will create a challenge for us. We want to enhance our climate ambition in the near term. Then, if we look into the RE, looking into their renewable energy commitment, we find out that for those 12 companies, only 3 of that actually they have a kind of like a higher RE consumption ratio compared to the average situation in Taiwan in 2023. And then even we look into the 2030 target, there's only 3 companies they have a kind of like emission enough target. And the TSMC they made a commitment to have the renewable energy. It's a good news for the IE100 creation, but it's also not so good news in terms of if we want to enhance our climate commitment for the 2030 or 2035. And I will talk about why. So in the later presentation. So the reason we want to have this research project from the CSO perspective, from the think tank of the working with the CSO, is that in Taiwan, because now we are talking about the chip diplomacy, so all the kind of like magnitudes of the semiconductor industry, it seems like an untouchable issue. And when we talk about their environmental commitment for that, the related government authority will say, okay, we don't have the expertise to monitoring that, to tracking that. So we want to have the way we only can have some dialogue with their renewable energy commitment around every plan-based environmental impact assessment process. But we are not able to bring them to talk about a strategic environmental assessment for the whole semiconductor industry in Taiwan. Then we lack of the policy mix try to implement the climate strategy for those companies. The last thing is that because Taiwan is the hotspot or the major production side of the semiconductor, so now we are see the semiconductor expansion around the world. But if we can learn from what we have discussed in Taiwan, we can provide a true climate checklist for this industry when we have some, we want to oversight some plan expansion in United States, in Japan, or in Germany. So that's the thing we want to talk about. We want to have in this research project. So in this project, we will try to take those 5 indicators into account, 5 elements into a consideration. But in the meantime, we only can able to do the 3 things. So we only can include the supply chain diversification into a consideration. So this is not what we consider in Taiwan. Then we are talking about the maximize the energy and the resource efficiency and some kind of like a more aggressive commitment for the IE for the RE 100. So those are the things we are taking into consideration right now. But we are still thinking about maybe there will be more elements we should come to include in our study. So I'm looking forward for the discussion when we to see which kind of factor should be included in this kind of discussion. So I will pass my microphone to Dr. Lu. He was talking about how can we do those kind of production capacity for testing within our research.
Hello everyone. Nice to be here. My name is Yong, and today, we are going to talk about our forecast or prediction about the semiconductors capacity in Taiwan. And of course, it's a challenging task, and actually, I think it's very tricky. Yeah. So because now we know the industry changes very fast, very quickly. So this table shows the TSMC's evolution over time. So you can see it's there are a lot, and you can see some patterns. Every 2 to 3 years, you can find a new generation into the market. And so, but even we know the patterns, we don't know how to predict the exact detail of future generations. So we thought it might be helpful if we can classify semiconductors into different groups based on some common term like advanced or mature process. And so we use the savings data and we break into and under some reasonable identification definition, and then we break the semiconductor into 3 tiers. And we found that these tiers have very stable shares over year. So the tier 1 is the most advanced process and in the semiconductor, which holds about 5% in total capacity. And the tier 2 is less advanced, but still advanced, and it holds about 40% of the total capacity. And the largest one is the tier 3, the mature process, which holds about 55% of the whole total capacity. So by using, so how do we identify, how do we define those tiers? You can see the tables. And the red one, the red boxes here are tier 1. And they are actually, those are the generations we haven't seen 6 years ago. And I just say that every 2 to 3 years, we can see new generations into the market. So that means in each year, there are at least 2 generations in tier 1. Okay. And then you can see the blue boxes. Okay, they are tier 3. And until 2026, they are identified as those larger than 40 nanometers. And after that, it's above 40. It's about 28, sorry. And 28 or 40 nanometers are defined by based on data, and it's also pretty much the market view. So after that, we can define our tier 2, which falls between tier 1 and tier 3. And so that's our definition on the table. And so since we know, we can break down the semiconductor into 3 tiers, and they have pretty good stable ratios, and we can simplify our models. And our goal is very straightforward. We want to know what is the capacity of Taiwan in the future. Okay, it's a very tricky part, but we can rewrite Taiwan's future capacity into whole the global capacity in the future, and then times the Taiwan's market share. It's the equation. And then by using the tiers, 3 tiers, we can separate the equation into 3 parts. And in tier 1, Taiwan's capacity can be rewrite as current global capacity times the growth rate, and then times the tier 1's ratio, and times tier 1's share, and Taiwan's market share in the future in tier 1. Okay, so that we can do the same things in tier 2 and tier 3. So the question can be extended to rewrite to this form, and where Q is the semiconductor capacity we can find from semis data, and G is the annual growth rate of global semiconductor capacity. We assume it to be 7% as market expects the market size to double in 10 years. Okay, and then R1 bar to R3 bar is the capacity share of tier 1 to 3. We can calculate it by semis data. Okay. And then the most tricky part is this part. And I am not sure that you can see that. I remove this shirt. Okay, the most tricky part is the market one to market 3. That means Taiwan's market share in tier 1 to tier 3. Okay. And so we can calculate it because we have the definition of tier 1 to 3. So we can calculate it, and by semis data, we can know the history data. And we also need to predict the market share of 1 to 3 of Taiwan's market share in tier 1 to 3. And we need to use the semis data. We need to know the trend, and also we need to add the relevant information. Okay, so they are huge. And there are the keys to making prediction. Okay, the table just shows that we got the semis data, and we can know the global capacity, and we can know the composition of tier 1 to 3, and also Taiwan's market share. And I say Taiwan is a valid location. So even the foreign companies located in Taiwan is counted, their capacity is counted into Taiwan's capacity. On the contrary, if Taiwanese company provide some capacity, but they are located in other countries, it's not counted into Taiwan's capacity. Okay. So let's see our prediction. That's the tier 1's market share. The red line is Taiwan's market share, and the red line here is the historical data. And you can also see other countries' market share here. So we found that it's very interesting because it has a decline, because we usually see Taiwan #1, and actually we got the decline very fast, and from its peak in 2020. And we think because now the semiconductor industry is getting more attention from among all the countries. So especially US, Europe, Japan, yes, also Korea. So we think we believe that Taiwan's market share may continue the decline trend, into about 30% by 2035. Okay. And there are some information here. If you want to take a look, US CHIPS Act and Taiwan, Morris John said that we just can't hold our privilege maybe 20 to 30 years. In tier 2, there are 2 factors affecting Taiwan's market share in tier 2. The first one is definition, because over time, the tier 2 will be more advanced, of course. So because Taiwan got a higher share in more advanced semiconductors, so that means over time, Taiwan's market share in tier 2 would be higher. But the other problem, the other factor is that because tier 2 is also advanced, and it's much easier than tier 1 to produce. So that means there is challenging competition among other countries, of other countries. So because of these 2 factors, we assume that our Taiwan's market share in tier 2 will keep the same from the level in 2027, which is about 18.5%. And tier 3 is very clear. Taiwan's market share is keep declining. And as China can expand their capacity very easily, because it's a mature process. And to Taiwan, it's less efficient for Taiwan to invest more resources into tier 3 compared to tier 1. Considering we got very limited resources in Taiwan, so we assume that Taiwan's capacity in tier 3 will keep the same. So but we know that the global capacity in tier 3 will keep going up. So our share will go down. Okay. So among all so combine the tier 1, 2, 3 as the shares, as Taiwan's market share in tier 1, 2, 3 are either declining or taking stand. So overall, Taiwan's market share in semiconductor industry will getting down. Okay, from 20% to about 30% by 2035. However, I just talked about the market share, the Taiwan's market share. But you know, there's still a 7% growth rate in the whole market. So Taiwan's market, Taiwan's capacity in the semiconductor industry will still going up. Just maybe lower growth rate compared to the global market. Okay, so that's our prediction for now. Thank you.
Okay, so after we know those kind of production forecast with those kind of strategic understanding perspective on that, then we can add more layer in terms of our scenario discussion. So here we made a two scenario because main objective of this research is to understand their climate consequence. So the first scenario we are talking about is the announced policy scenario, which will focus on the production forecasting based on what Dr. Lu had just mentioned, and we will also consider the renewable energy commitment. So like the TSMC, they want to reach RE100 by year 2040. So that means that they have to reach the RE80 by 2035. And for the others, there is some commitment. The government have some proposal. So they ask all the electronic companies should be RE100 by year 2050. So for the 2035, they still have to around 50% of their electricity should come from the renewable energy. But and for the energy efficiency, that's tricky part. Nowadays they don't have a very aggressive discussion around that. But we see there's a kind of like discussion around some mandatory energy saving target for Taiwan's energy intensive industry that include semiconductors. But this is the announced policy scenario. But if we want to have a net zero aligned scenario, we should be more we should have an additional assumption. We should have a more tightened policy in terms of the existing commitments. Like we are talking about, maybe Taiwan should be focused on the advanced tier one manufacturing. Although the tier one manufacturing they are quite energy intensive compared to the tier 3 part, but we still thinking maybe we can limit the level of the tier 3 production. Then we should have a more aggressive RE target. Like all the industry should be RE85 by end of 2035. And the TSMC made a commitment on they want to double their energy productivity for every 5 years. But we dig into their commitment. Actually, there's a little bit harder to reach that in terms of the theoretical discussion. So that's the challenge we are seeing. But we are through if they can pursue EP100 every 10 years, is double their energy productivity for every 10 years. That will be something that can help us to know the emission consequence for that. So I will just looking into the scope 2 emission, which will contribute around 75 direct and indirect emission of the semiconductor industry Taiwan. So so if we just taking the announced policy scenario, we can see that they can only able to reduce the scope 2 emission of the semiconductor industry by around 45%, around 50% by year 2035, which is the target year for our second round of the NDC. So this kind of thing is that they are not compatible with the requirement to reach the net zero by year 2050. So but with our net zero aligned commitments, that will they can have chance to reduce their scope 2 emission by 90% in year 2035. That will make the Taiwan can be more easy to achieve our climate commitment in the coming year, and that can break some barrier we have in the discussion of around 2035 NDC. So nowadays the government are using the fast extension of the semiconductor as a excuse not to say, oh, we are doubling our LNG capacity, so that leads to a very challenge for us to accelerate the emission commitment. So there's some new policy we need to proceed, and but because the time has out, so I will leave that to the discussion part when we can discuss some kind of like policy implications for the not just for Taiwan but also for Germany, but also for the United States. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Zhao and Dr. Lu, for the presentations. Let's move away the chairs.
Yes.
Yeah, so that we can see the both sides. The slide. Okay, so Julia, the floor is yours.
Yeah, exactly. Hello, and warm thank you for inviting me to present the kind of European perspective today. I wrote a paper in June on mapping the ecological footprint of chip production, and I'm gonna talk a bit about that, but maybe before I do that, I would like to introduce or say a few words about Interface. So I'm a senior policy researcher at Interface on global chip dynamics. That means that I'm working on two work streams. The first one is more focused on geopolitical implications, and the second one is focused on sustainability, ecological matters. But with time, I kind of see that these are like very much intertwined. So it's not really like two separate work streams anymore. Interface, we are tech policy think tank based in Berlin. Our former name was Stiftung Neue Verantwortung. You see it there on the bottom. It is very hard to pronounce outside of Germany. That was one of the reasons why we changed it. We are a non-profit, non-party, independent think tank that has 98% of its funding from the government or other foundations. We are more focused not so much on the climate aspect, but much more on the tech policy areas. So our idea is to kind of shape tech policy discussions primarily in Europe, but also always taking into account the global perspective on it. So colleagues of mine, for example, are working on cybersecurity, platform regulation, AI, and many more things. And the idea is always to kind of focus only on one technology area to make sure that we have enough time to really dive deep into these very complex issues, complex questions of regulations, and then come up with policy recommendations that are specifically tailored to this specific technology. As I'm representing the European role here today, I just wanted to refresh our memory first on the setup of the global semiconductor value chain, but also on Europe's role in it, because I think for most of you probably the Taiwanese role is much more obvious and like known. For Europe, it's a bit more tricky. So if you are looking at the left-hand side, you can see like a bird's eye view. So this is very, very generalized, but these are the three production steps. So we have chip design, wafer fabrication, assembly, test, and packaging. Wafer fabrication is also called front-end manufacturing, assembly, test, and packaging. Back-end manufacturing, like the public discourse is mostly centered around the second production step, so wafer fabrication, and that's also the production step with the highest ecological. Now we also have crucial inputs. So for the design part, that's design software, but also third-party IP. If we are looking at the manufacturing side, and that's more the topic for today, it's equipment, chemicals, and wafers. And for us in Europe, our role is not so much in, like you are talking a lot and hearing a lot about, like the most advanced chips that are produced in Taiwan. That's not so much the area that Europe is strong in. We are more strong in like volume niche markets, specifically tailored towards the end customer industries that are strong in Europe. So for example, automotive, health industry, industrial applications. So automotive semiconductors, power electronics, sensors, all of this is manufactured in Europe. On top of that, we are very strong in chemicals. So we have some companies such as Merck or BASF that are very much like indispensable also in the value chain, supplying wet chemicals, supplying photoresist, supplying etching gases, stuff like that. And then of course we have important roles in the equipment supply. So here again, focusing on deposition and lithography equipment. And then last but not least, Europe is also very strong in conducting research and development, specifically with RTOs such as Fraunhofer, CLAT, and IMEC. So this is also super important to keep in mind. So kind of a very complementary role with regard or in contrast to Taiwan. That's why I felt like it's important to mention it. Now moving on to the topic of today, so thinking about what, if we want to map the ecological footprint of chip production, what do we need to consider? So in my opinion, we are talking today a lot about decarbonization, and I think that's like one of the biggest issues, but I would say that we also have to factor in the environmental kind of lens or perspective. So kind of going beyond GHG emissions and also thinking about what do we need to consider if we really want to like map the whole ecological footprint. 1 second. So I don't know if you heard, but you are probably very familiar with the GHG protocol. This week, when I was attending a lot of the events, I learned that there's also a new protocol underway that is more focused on circularity. And I think this kind of very nicely factors in the question of like, how do we make sure that we don't miss like a specific part or like a crucial part, which is like the environmental impact. It's just like as a side note. We already talked about the different scopes in the GHG protocol before, so I don't want to take up too much time of that. And I also see that you don't really see the colors in the left chart. So yeah, so just like very, very quickly. So one in the chart on the left would be mainly the use of chemicals, specifically fluorinated gases and PFAS chemicals. So this is scope one. So use of chemicals is like has like the largest share. Second is energy consumption, so indirect emissions that are emissions that are from the manufacturing part. This is basically electricity consumption. We also heard this before. And then the third scope is indirect emissions along the value chain. So basically everything that you can see upstream and downstream. And I'm gonna dive into these 4 columns a bit more on the next slides. One more thing, I forgot about that. For example, the whole debate on data centers. We of course also have to factor in when we are talking about downstream usage part of chips. So there's like an additional dimension that I'm not going to focus on that much in my presentation. So upstream is something kind of like according to also the role of Europe, where like people kind of tend to forget how crucial it is to also factor in the supplier markets. The upstream impact is super important to understand because we have a highly complex manufacturing process, specifically in the front end, where we need 300 different types of chemicals. We need 50 different types of equipment. And of course, it's kind of just logic that you know that all these types of equipment have to be produced, they have to be processed. Raw materials have to be mined, such as copper and cobalt. And then, of course, we also have external power suppliers as well as own energy and generation. This is also part of the upstream emissions, also part of like the direct, indirect emissions and so too. And then one more thing that I really want to stress, this is a very, very thirsty industry. So a large fab uses up to 338 million liters or like 10 million gallons of liters per day. And that's kind of equivalent to, I think, 300,000 households in Germany. So it's really a lot. I think it's important also to mention that you can recycle a large share of it. It's ultra pure water you need, but you still can use a lot of the water also for other types of processes and production steps. But still, I think it's important to understand because if you're looking at the recycling rates, they very, very much differ if you're looking at the recycling rates, for example, in Europe versus Taiwan, because Taiwan has much more water scarce, for example. So you can really double down on water recycling if you want to make sure that you decrease your impacts regarding water consumption. Next would be front-end and back-end manufacturing. I already talked about these two production steps just to make sure why I'm focusing on the front-end manufacturing part. One explanation, for example, is if you look at just the length of the manufacturing. So front-end manufacturing, it takes at least 12 weeks, whereas the back-end manufacturing part, it's only taking around 4 weeks. So you can already see there that it's a huge difference. Then on top of that, the usage of fluorinated gases, so mainly scope 1, is basically just happening in the front-end manufacturing. And also the back-end manufacturing, it's much more labor intensive. It's not that automated, which means it doesn't need that much packaging. So that's kind of the reason why I'm focusing a lot on front-end manufacturing today. What I think is interesting in that regard is that we have 7 process gases, so that's not that much, who make up 96% of fluorinated gas consumption. And I think it's very important to note that that's not something that you can change overnight. So kind of switching to alternative with regard to either fluorinated gases that are harmful to the climate or forever chemicals that are very harmful to the environment. And sometimes they also can be categorized in both of these categories. It will take at least a decade. So that's not something that can be changed easily, specifically when you are taking into account the complexity of the manufacturing process that you also cannot easily change because it's just, yeah, you have to like reflect or reorganize the whole manufacturing process. And then last point I want to make here, hourly energy consumption is also extremely high. So we have at least, and I think that's a very moderate thing, 100 gigawatt hours. So, and I think Gary, so the person talking after me, he's talking a lot about renewable energy certificates. So I'm going to keep this brief here, but it's a huge problem that, of course, we have energy as the biggest single source of emissions, but companies tend to just use renewable energy certificates instead of really making sure that they are using local energy and local renewable energy in the grid. And that's also partly because of the reporting mechanisms in the GHG. Then the last thing we have here now is the downstream emissions. I can also keep it brief here because everything I'm saying here, you have to take it with a grain of salt because we have a huge problem here, and the problem is that we don't really have transparency in that regard. As a semiconductor manufacturer, you are selling an intermediate product. So your product is not something that is targeted towards an end customer, but it's built into a specific device. So there's a lot of uncertainty and intransparency where the chip ends up in, and then also a lack of research regarding the usage of chips. I think for data centers, it's the only thing where there's kind of the difference here. Still, I want to make sure that we kind of reflect on the fact that specifically e-waste, it will grow significantly until this decade, and it's something where there are not really recycling practices in place right now. Of course, partly because we have to think about, is that even a good idea to invest a lot of time in like trying to recycle a semiconductor? Because like the amount of copper or cobalt or gold you can kind of reuse, it's very small, and the recycling process right now, state of the art, is very energy intensive and also it has like toxic leakage to the environment. The second point I already said, usage of chips is kind of logic again, that the battery powered device has higher emissions in production, whereas like with the strongest example of data centers, you have high emissions during usage if your device is always connected. And yeah, the last part, I thought it's super interesting, at least also with regard to circularity. And you can see that at least in the industry, there's not so much right now going on with regard to reusing materials in semiconductor production itself, but it is used in other industries. So that's at least like something that has already been done. Kind of connecting to or adding to the remark on intransparency and downstream emissions, I just wanted to kind of also summarize my criticism on the GHG protocol, because I think specifically with regard to the scope 3, there's a huge problem because you have 50 categories, but companies are not required to report on all of these 50 categories. So basically, you don't really can compare across the industry between companies across years, because every company is kind of picking and choosing from these 50 categories, and they can also report aggregate data. So it's super hard to really understand what's going on. And then again, market or location-based reporting is something that really changes like the whole picture with regard to renewable energy usage. And then of course, but I think that's just like one side comment, is also sometimes not clear if the company is reporting their front and back end manufacturing processes altogether. Just shedding some light on one of my projections. So it's also part of my paper. We already talked about the EU chips goal and the goal that we want in Europe also to have like 20% of global chip production. As you can see, and we've also seen it in the charts before, that Europe is not really a manufacturing hub. So for us, before, it wasn't really something we needed to worry about, because it's just like not that the emissions are not that high. This could significantly change if we are achieving the chip production goal, but I would also say, in my opinion, it doesn't really matter if we achieve it or not, because the fabs will be built somewhere, and I think it's much more important to right now focus the discussion on how can we, on a global scale, achieve chip production, no matter if the fab is built in the US, in Europe, or in Taiwan, but also, of course, always factoring in that we need to we have different regional challenges that we need to keep in mind and find solutions to. And I think, because I already saw my time is up, I'm going to keep this short. My conclusion would be that like I have 3 challenges. I think the second challenge I already talked about now. The first challenge I also talked about before. I really think that we also have to come up with like collective data sharing, interoperable data to assess not only the climate, but also the ecological footprint or like the environmental footprint of chip production. We need to harmonize standards, specifically with regard to scope 3. And also always like in policies factor in what it means. If, for example, in Europe, we come up with new reporting directives for eco-design requirements for the products we are importing, or like companies are exporting to us, because in the end, that's not kind of interoperable. It just creates like second order effects that just a burden for everyone. Last point, and I also make that here, but what I'm always observing in Europe, and I don't know how it is in Taiwan, is that we have like goals in specific policy areas, but they are not like really approached with like a holistic point of view. So this kind of creates challenges, because you have a goal in industrial policy that kind of conflicts with the goal in environmental policy. So I would also argue that we have to apply more holistic approaches that are not only like interconnected and kind of addressed on eye level on a national level, but also kind of keeping in mind secondary effects when it comes to like the global scale, because we are talking about interdependent transnational approaches. That's all.
Thank you so much, Julia. And now we will welcome Gary. Gary, can you hear us? Let's change the screen to, yeah, here. We see you here.
I can.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
And you're at the stage, yes. All right, I think we're all set. Gary, you hear us okay?
Perfectly.
Great. Okay, so the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks for the chance to speak this morning. I'm going to share my slides and try to show a few things that speak the analysis I did earlier this year on build out of semiconductor manufacturing in the United States. Hopefully technology will cooperate. Excellent. Can you guys see the slides? Great. Okay. So I did a report earlier this year in collaboration with Stand.Earth looking at the energy impact of the planned build out of semiconductor manufacturing fabs in particular in the United States that's underway, being incentivized by the US government currently through the CHIPS Act, with $50 billion worth of incentives being given out to a range of companies. And so it's really, the report was designed to look at what is the impact from an energy demand perspective on the ground, and what are the different strategies being deployed by the four large semiconductor manufacturers building factories in the US. And this builds on, previously I worked for Greenpeace for a great number of years. We did a very similar analysis looking at data centers through about over a 10-year period, 2010 to 2020, looking at the build out of that infrastructure and to what extent are companies pursuing renewable energy strategies to meet the demand, meet their growth with a renewable energy supply. So very quickly, sort of snapshot of the companies we looked at, really four major ones we looked at who are most prominent in the current construction in the United States: Intel, Micron, Samsung, and TSMC. And this is, you know, estimates that show in the hubs they are building, rough megawatts of capacity that they are communicating to the utilities in terms of electricity demand. And you have the local grid mix, and also indication all of them, you have commitments to 100% renewable in the US or at a corporate level. And so again, going back to the work I did when I was at Greenpeace, I mean, this is these commitments from companies previously showed to be very important to drive new renewable energy deployment. I think we really, in that period of time, we saw a shift from the IT sector, led by the IT sector and gradually embraced by others, companies moving away from reliance on renewable energy credits and shifting to using power purchase agreements to secure large volumes of renewable energy supply to meet their demand. And I think this is sort of a movement from a 1.0 renewables, which relied on renewable energy credits, to a 2.0 version, which is where companies are signing PPAs and driving renewable energy deployment at utility scale. But looking at the report we published in February, so looked at, well, okay, what does the current snapshot look like in terms of comparing major IT brands and the data center side, and more broadly with the major semiconductor manufacturers. And unfortunately, what this snapshot shows is for Apple and Google and Meta, and for a significant part Microsoft, you see them pursuing higher impact strategies where they're using PPAs or partnering with utilities under their new green tariff programs to secure renewable energy supply associated with their operations. Unfortunately, with the semiconductor manufacturers, and particularly with regard to Intel, with heavy reliance on sort of 1.0 renewable energy strategy, which involves the use of unbundled renewable energy credits, which I think has been shown by many and increasingly recognized that this typically has little to no impact on adding new renewable energy supply, and is really disconnected from the impact that this new large infrastructure is having on the grid. And so going back to the semiconductor, driving it a bit down, so for RECs, I think it's increasing recognition of the problems the current reliance on RECs is having on climate targets, the claims being of 100% renewable energy not reflecting reality on the ground. And I think you're seeing a steady pushback. Many of you may have seen there's another study, big article in the Financial Times that came out in August that looked at some of the larger tech brands and to what extent their emissions are being significantly underreported as a result of their use of renewable energy credits to adjust their greenhouse gas emissions profile. So I'm going to take a bit of a deep dive on one particular part of the U.S. where there's probably the largest build out of semiconductor manufacturing. It's Arizona. This is a slide from the Arizona Public Service, one of the two major utilities in Arizona. So showing the expected growth in demand from IT sector companies. The one in yellow is really this is the extra large customers, and the companies that are driving that demand are TSMC, who's in APS territory, and also some data centers. And so showing significant, with a planned build out being projected into the 2030s, how much of it goes to a very significant amount of their expected load. And so looking deeper at this, look at 4 companies who have facilities currently or under construction in Arizona. And the highlights of this slide, without having to break it down too much, so you have estimated demand on the left 2 columns, to what extent they're being met with PPAs in state or in grid adjacent areas in Arizona, and the local renewable energy mix. And so in the far right column shows what is the expected demand of in sum from the facilities under construction to the grid. And so if companies are not adding renewable energy supply to the Arizona grid, that's going to create more demand. Apple and Microsoft at this point, things are always changing with the amount of demand being driven by data centers currently, but at least for Arizona have been signed contracts for renewables that mostly net out their demand on an annual basis. And that actually gets to a question: is this actually, what is the strategy that's going to meet the need for such large build out of infrastructure, both for data centers and semiconductors? And here you have a graph that was a study that was done in 2022, I believe, or early 2023. So looking at a comparison of different strategies. So, and this is just focusing on the 2.0 PPA approach, which looks at the amount of reductions that can be secured from PPAs. Now, is currently being pursued by most companies. The PPAs can add a large amount of power to a local grid, but typically they're buying one or the other, solar or wind, and that these are intermittent sources. So when the sun goes down, you're drawing from the grid average. So if you're even on an annual basis matching your electricity demand with 100% similar equivalent amount of solar power or solar electricity, you're still having to line the grid for a significant part of your load. And that's if you look at a day-by-day basis. And so I think increasingly companies like Google and others are looking at how do we get more granular in our measurement of our renewable energy commitments, and moving to a 24/7 basis where they're looking at deploying a mix of technologies and also storage to match their demand throughout the day and throughout the year. And this won't be possible everywhere at once, but this is already being pursued by Google and several other companies who have made 24/7 clean energy commitments. Because I think that look at the weaknesses of the current approach, leaving aside, recognize that everyone accepts the 1.0 strategy, which relies on renewable energy credits, as not being impactful. Like, how do we improve the 2.0? And Julia mentioned some of this in her presentation, but the accounting rules under the protocol currently are very open-ended, allow for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, even using a 1.0 strategy currently, and that's up for updating in the coming year. And so that creates a disincentives for companies to take higher impact strategies. The annualized measurement under the 2.0 approach has been impactful for driving a lot of renewable energy deployment. But if we need to fully remove fossil fuels from the grid, we need to be measuring much more carefully, much more granularly. And there's still a great deal of very uneven amount of performance in reporting electricity demand. Companies are very quick to report new sources of renewable energy, but often don't provide the amount of electricity they're trying to match that supply with. And if it's too easy to meet your goal of 100% renewable energy, the incentives for companies to pursue what is really needed is greater advocacy to change the grid and make sure the investments in electricity generation infrastructure are heading in the right direction to make sure the supply is actually 100% renewable. And so I think you see this is happening. This debate is happening at many levels in many countries, the need for changing the boundaries of how we're measuring renewable energy goals. And so here we're moving from the current system of largely a 2.0 approach with PPAs to increasingly how do you shift into more granular hourly approach on a 24/7 basis. And I think important pillars include, so the 3 pillars include is time boundary. It's also making sure you're getting attached to your demand is actually physically meeting your supply of renewable energy and not having to be disconnected, which is currently a significant problem. And making sure especially if we're building out new infrastructure that is really driving demand, as you see in Arizona, that this is being met with new supply. Otherwise, you're shifting the burden of your new demand to other customers, and they'll have to pay the cost of new generation if the state or our countries didn't meet their energy targets. And I think the good news is I think a lot of the momentum for shifting to 24/7 type measurement is growing. It showed the impacts are been quantified by a number of different quarters, different countries. This will not be happening at all countries at the same time. But certainly, I think in North America and Europe, there's a big momentum to shift to this type of measurement, which I think it incentivizes greater investment by companies in transitioning the grid to renewable energy. Also, it incentivizes the use of other types of technology, especially on the storage side, to time shift the renewable supply so it can be accessed throughout the day. I think as a point of comparison worth calling out that this is up for debate. As Julia highlighted, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is up for revision. Some companies have joined together, some of whom are in the semiconductor space, particularly Intel, who are proposing rule changes that would actually weaken the current 2.0 approach to basically allow emissions credits or renewable energy credits to be used to offset emissions far removed from their supply. So getting away with the local pillar that I just referenced and not trying to get into a more granular measurement. It's really about can you offset your emissions anywhere? Let's focus on the emissions and use that as a way to adjust your scope 2 or scope 3 footprint. So this would actually significantly reduce transparency, reduce the impact of renewable procurement, and be the opposite direction from becoming more granular, more local measurement of renewable energy supply. And I think this is a study that was done because it's not just about semiconductor manufacturing or data centers. It also has relevance for hydrogen production, green hydrogen production. How do you make sure green hydrogen production is in fact truly green? And this study that was done by Princeton looked at the different ways of measuring the performance of renewable energy supply in the hydrogen context. And the emissionality, sort of the emissions first, and it shows in the far right column being significantly higher, whereas the hourly matching on the left side shows significant reductions. And so this has actually been codified in the current draft rule for tax incentives for green hydrogen in the US, which is going to require hourly measurement, local supply, and new generation to be counted for green hydrogen. And so this is hopefully a trend that will continue as not only in hydrogen debates, but also it could be relevant for the semiconductor manufacturing. If we're using taxpayer incentives to drive deployment and for our industrialization policy, we really should be making sure that is helping us take us in the right direction in terms of our national or state or regional renewable energy and greenhouse gas goals. So I think it's a real opportunity for policymakers in particular to focus on the need for connecting the new expansion we see both from semiconductors and as well as for data centers to make sure that's taking us in the right direction in terms of it's a significant new load in aggregate and particularly on the ground in certain countries or states to make sure this is going to be leading us towards higher performance and fossil fuel phase out. So I think in some, it's like the two main reforms that I think are needed, and there's not one lever we have to pull, it's several, but like the sector needs to move away from reliance on unbundled RECs. If you look at the environmental impact statements for the semiconductors fabs that have been published so far, with exception of Micron, who seems to be securing some supply from PPAs, both TSMC and Intel are indicating they're primarily relying on unbundled RECs to meet their renewable energy goals. And so I think a phase out of that approach and a shift to a more granular 24/7 approach is what's needed to begin to understand is this new infrastructure, are these new facilities on the path to both 100% renewable energy and ultimately to decarbonization. I'm out of time, and so I'll turn it back over to New York.
All right. Hello. Yeah, this one. All right. Okay. All right. So thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Now let's welcome the presenters to sit in the front. Dr. Zhao, Dr. Liu, Julia, and Gary, you're in the center of our screen. So, we do have, let me check the time. I think we still have around half an hour to have our conversation. So I will welcome, since it's a hybrid event, we do both online and in person. So for the online audience, you please welcome to post your question on Slido. In both, you can do both that in Chinese and English. I can do that translation later in here. But for now, let's welcome from the floor. Anyone who have a question for the presenters? Ricky in the back. And the mic will be there. Yeah.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you so much for the presentations. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I have two questions. The first one is, so I had the chance to talk to TSMC a couple of weeks ago around how to make on-site renewable possible, and for some of their facilities, their response is essentially that like they wouldn't consider putting solar panels on any of their industrial sites because of risks, because of insurance issues, because of potential electromagnetics issues. I'm wondering if that is also the case for chip manufacturing sites elsewhere, and if so, are there any reasonable pathways towards mitigating those risks? My second question has to do with, obviously, semiconductors are integral to so many different technologies around the world for different applications, etc. But it is also mission or purpose agnostic, meaning that like you can't really control for how it's going to be used in the current state. I'm wondering if there are any ways to make chip manufacturing more climate forward, meaning that like chips are obviously very, very important for EVs, for a lot of climate solutions. Are there ways to design chips specifically for these climate focused purposes? Thank you.
Okay, wonderful questions. Any presenter want to take on this?
One second.
1 second. Okay, so the first question is in regards. Yeah.
I'm happy to
Sure.
take a stab at the first one.
Yes.
So if I've understood the question, it's centered on, is the bar that has to be cleared for procuring renewable energy for a fab, does it have to be on site? And the answer is definitely no. There are, I think TSMC and maybe Intel have done some on-site solar attached to their parking lots, but the solar's, it's such a fabs as well as data centers are such energy dense facilities. You're not going to power those facilities from on-site resources unless you have on-site geothermal. And so the answer is to be securing you, and especially in the US, this is much easier than in say Taiwan, but you have lots of land and you need to just deploy renewables and where the resource is and bring it to the facility through appropriate transmission. So you don't have to do it on site. Data centers don't do renewable energy on site. They're doing large wind farms, solar farms that are being managed by the utility or by others to bring power to the facility.
Maybe focus on the first one first. Any from the European stream?
I also wanted to say sense of yeah, I just wanted to say what Gary said. So also when I was looking at the CSR reports in Europe from the companies, they mostly have renewable energy sources in the Scandinavian countries and then maybe also the countries like Germany, but it's not common to install like solar or wind parks directly. In fact, there was like for Intel, there was a discussion around the wind park, but when I was talking to the people responsible for the investment, they were like, yeah, that was just a rumor, that doesn't make sense. So I would just stress that I have the same impression, but I don't think that that is an excuse that we can take because like you can install the renewable energy somewhere else.
Well, what we see in Taiwan is that there are even the authority who in charge of all the science park, they also refuse that to set out a mandatory requirement to set out the rooftop PV in the semiconductor company. So they worry about those things. But as an NGO, we also propose that maybe they can do a similar thing like let's say there's a solar for all situation. We are asked the TSMC should be work with the local government to kind of provide additional incentive for the rooftop solar around the community, so they can give a higher feed-in tariff rate or things like to do that. So it's not necessary you have to work in the on-site part, but you can also figure out some kind of like a more innovative way to do that. But I will point out that there's a challenge in Taiwan when we talk about this issue is that I have a sense that all the information I get is that a lot of the leaders business leaders in the semiconductor industry, they are still thinking they are just electricity buyer consumer. So they did not think, oh, we are shapers for the overall policy environment. So I would say that's the blind spot we have to see for that. They just ask the government, you should give us a very streamlined procedure for us. We can sign a PPA for anyone. But if that PPA, the price of that PPA is not so in their desired range, they will whine about that. And we ask the government to have certain kind of approach to lower that down. But they did not think, oh, they are the shepherds for those kind of situations. It's quite different than they perceive for other kind of the thing. So I will just jump quickly to the second question that we mentioned. I mean, although we are talking about the semiconductor is an inevitable part of our daily life, but I think the majority of the semiconductors are still using the consumer devices. So that's why we are saying maybe you can think about the linkage between the right repair and also the semiconductor and the cheaper demand, because we see the April is quite a anxiety around those kind of try to prepare issues. But this is hardly discussed in Taiwan. And then also in TSMC, they like to say one thing that related to the kind of they are saying because that was accused by the NGO and by media say, oh, you consume a lot of electricity. But there was science study that say that every kilowatts electricity they use in the manufacturing can save 4 additionally kilowatts of the electricity in the end of the device. But this denier, there's no scientific evidence for that. And then even in their scope 3 emission, they did not include those things into the discussion. So I would say that will be only an excuse, not the thing we are seeing right now. And then I think we can refer some discussion around the AI because nowadays there are some talking about restricting using AI for the oil and gas exposure. So maybe we can have that kind of climate friendly cheaper application, those kind of discussion. Yeah.
Thank you.
Julia and Gary, any thoughts about climate-friendly chip making? Maybe start from Julia.
Yeah, happy to elaborate on that. So my impression always is specifically with European policymakers that there's still a lack of like in-depth knowledge, being able to differentiate between like what type of chip ends up in an electric vehicle versus what type of chip do we need for AI acceleration or like consumer electronics. And I think that's a discussion that is super important because if you are trying to kind of differentiate and like start with the fact that a chip is not like a chip, so you have to differentiate between different types. We can also think about ways to kind of incentivize specific types of chip production that are enabling the green transition. You can also, for example, think about like how do you innovate in these areas? Because we talked a lot about like logic chips and processors, which is like one of the main principles for innovation is transistor scaling, node scaling, so kind of following Moore's law. But if you're, for example, looking at the charging infrastructure for electric vehicles, here you have like more innovation on the level of like different materials. So for example, silicon carbide, gallium nitride. So I think also like kind of starting in the beginning and thinking about like what type of chip that can be made more energy efficient or like more sustainable from the design to the manufacturing to the end of life is something that I think we have to kind of do in a structured way and then taking into account like the diversity of chips. And then maybe just one more thing I would like to add because it kind of also adds to the discussion or the presentation we heard in the beginning about like TSMC kind of also struggling because they are like having market leading positions in like the very, very advanced chips, so the cutting edge areas, which also tend to have the problem that the emissions increase per wafer because you have to like repeat specific steps. So you need to have like more energy, you need more water. Like some of the newest EUV lithography machines, they use much more energy. So there's kind of like a new challenge there to kind of cope with what happens if emissions per wafer increase because the type of product you are producing just requires like the higher complexity of manufacturing. And I think that's also something that you have to factor in. And then that's my last point, but I think it's also super important just to realize here, of course, like for the logic chips that end up in a new smartphone, like the best way for especially consumer electronics is just to extend the lifetime. It's not something that a semiconductor manufacturing company wants to hear, but let's be serious here. Like it's a very easy solution. Like if we all extend our lifetime, the chips that are not like a direct enabling technology have a much lower footprint. So I think we also need to take this into consideration here.
Thank you, Julia. Gary?
Thanks. Just to add briefly, I think clearly these investments of semiconductor fabs are very long-lived investments. And I think from we're all working to decarbonize as fast as we can. I think the value proposition is there for certainly near, mid, and long term in particular, where customers can be more demanding. They're going to want to make sure they're wanting to reduce their own footprint. They'll want to be working with suppliers who can meet their own climate goals, renewable energy goals. And you've seen this already in the marketplace. And not enough customers are discerning for semiconductors right now, but I think you're starting to see a greater awareness of how important that is for their own goals. And you see customers become more demanding. Similarly, as Julie is pointing to for policymakers, I think they are certainly recognize the importance of having domestic supply of semiconductor manufacturing. I think the ones that are aware of the differences in manufacturing capacity are pushing for greater incentives for renewable energy to make sure that these investments that they're bringing to their state or their country are going to be competitive going forward. And I think it's really important that we get this right for this huge build out underway, that we're thinking about the supply of renewable energy as and there's certainly others issues. Julia had this in her excellent paper that looked at the other impacts from semiconductor manufacturing that need to be factored in. But the customers and the public are demanding cleaner solutions. It's in their interest to meet that expectation and make the investments now in a way that can allow them to be an environmental leader and not simply take what allows them to take credit under the current accounting system.
Thank you, Gary. All right. Any other questions from our audience?
Yeah, hi. I know you talked about.
We have mic now. Yeah.
Oh, hi there. I'm Julia from Geology Communication. And you talked briefly about, e-waste and, we talked about increasing collection rates, but the reality of, all the effort that it takes to actually recover the metals. But what about more, I guess to some degree that's linking to the right to repair laws, but the idea of you're talking about restricting the production in tier 3. What about some of those what used to be tier 1 chips some years from now, reusing them in other devices and increasing that kind of thing? And so there could be contract manufacturers that benefit from that, even though the fabs aren't producing more chips. What are the discussions going on in that kind of area?
I can start. So I think that's an excellent question, and I think like one of the key problem is that you have like a variety of chips that is kind of built onto a PCB, so you cannot really recover a single chip that is on that PCB, and the problem there is that it's like specifically designed for specific products. So I would say like the microcontroller that was like very like top notch a few decades ago, you cannot find like a new use in, I don't know, your microwave, because it has to fulfill like different functions, it has to withstand different temperatures. All of these things kind of, in my opinion, hinder it, because these are all like products that are often, they cannot like build into other devices easily. I mean, I think we can probably do it, but I think it takes a lot of effort. And then again, you have like very small components, so no one is, in my opinion, like interested in doing that now. But I think we have to be creative in that regard. So I wouldn't say it's not an idea that it could be feasible, but I think it would need like a reflection on how you would design a chip and like more standardize the chip itself, and maybe also find other ways, for example, biodegradable PCB, so that you could also like use specific chips in a chip set.
Actually, this is a question that I was wondering in my mind when I'm doing this study, but I don't have additional information right now, but there's a lot of of our organization that are working in this issue around the circular economy along the electronic supply chain, and they are working with the TSMC, but they are doing a lot more around the chemical solvent stuff. So maybe you can leave us a message. Maybe you can, after I come in Taiwan and talk to them, whether to see we can have some kind of daily finding and daily discussion in the field. And I will also want to second what Julia said is that if everyone was using the bare phone, maybe we can have another kind of consideration about the time extension. So that's the reason, that's the issue we want to include in our final study in our research. But we want to bring this issue into discussion. So we want that the electronics industry and the semiconductor industry, when they talk about the semiconductor, they talk about circular economy, usually based on around those root cause or around the circular economy, the new challenge for that. Not just dealing with all those, I would say, still say it's kind of end of pipe circular economy issue, but we are thinking about the new business model. So that's an issue we want to highlight during our research.
Yeah.
Things to add on this question?
I just underscore it goes back to the manufacturers. I mean, the Apples, the Googles, even the people who are demanding the servers, all those things. It's all about design. How do you design products for repairability and extended life? Otherwise, if you have one component that has to be, you can't upgrade, then the whole device gets trashed. And that's a huge problem. That's why you see right to repair laws taking root in many countries. And so hopefully that will become more of a requirement that design has to reflect longevity.
Great. Anyone else? Let me check if there are questions online. From our online audience, I don't see any as for now. So please post questions if you have any. We do have a few minutes left. So as a moderator, I'll propose my own. And I think a big theme in New York Climate Week is the urgency of climate action. So I think in many of the sessions, there's a desire wanting to know what can be done right here, right now. So I think this is my question to all the presenters. So what are some concrete actions for the industry, for the government? I know most of you have already talked about some aspect of these in your presentation. Maybe you can reiterate the message on what are some of the most important concrete actions you can see, and what are some changes you especially want to see to facilitate these actions. So maybe we will do the fighting order, maybe from the first men's double, Dr. Lu and Dr. Zhao.
Okay. From my perspective, I think because I'm doing the forecast, doing the prediction, and we found the rule that the market should grow up. Yeah, because the capital is understand. Because the market, the money is over there. So that's of course that so even Taiwan's market share may go down or other countries may go up, but actually in the whole world the market should go up because the game is like that. So I think the key problem is how can we really deal with this problem, and yeah, because the market can be double, just like I say, 7% growth rate every year. So you can say it's like wow, rocket, like go to the sky. But yeah, but we don't have such resources. Like in Taiwan, we don't have such land. We just want to have more windmill or solar panel, but we don't have enough land to provide enough resources to TSMC actually. So yeah, so I don't know. So I think the system may need to be changed, and yeah, if the system cannot be changed, against that can be changed, then I think everything will be the same. Business as usual. So that's that's a little bit not so optimistic. Sorry. So that's my point.
So the first thing I want to highlight is that because now the semiconductor game is quite different than what we see 5 years ago. Because 5 years ago we will see only the Taiwan, Korea, and China talking about the semiconductor manufacturing and all the kind of like additionally discussion related to the energy requirements those and water consumption issue that will kind of concentrate to those countries which we call developmental country. So that's provide a lot of enabling condition for the industry to grow. So now we are thinking see that extension to the United States and to EU. So from my side, I would say if there's more discussion in EU in let's say talking about like the more strict IEPA rule or 724 requirement, we can bring that back to Taiwan as a kind of like, you cannot have the double standard. You are doing the good thing in the foreign United States in EU, but you are kind of ignore all the additional requirements in Taiwan. So that's why we want to have this forum to fill out this kind of international network, focus, especially from the CSO side, talking about this issue. I know the association, the Semiconductor Association, they have a constitution of the climate change, but they are dealing with the more technical issue, but not the more strategic thinking. So that's why I think that will be a good start point that we have this kind of discussion. So that's the I would say the most important thing is that we should I wanted to say we want to people out the ground when we want to have a dialogue with the semiconductor industry. Well, in the meantime, the authority, energy authority, they are not able to talk to them because the board of the TSMC can have a call direct to the president office, so things like that. So they are thinking, oh, those things are not able to talk about. But now in Taiwan, we are talking about cheaper technology in doing this on-guard, the advertisement by our Ministry of the Foreign Affairs, they are using chip in with Taiwan. They are using chip as a kind of like a key slogan to talk about that. But since we want to talk, the chip is not just a business, there should be a kind of like a common, public common. We have to bring those kind of consideration into this discussion to give a more concrete social license for this industry to find their right position around the journey to the net zero.
Yeah, really adding to that, I think like push toward common goals on a global scale, as I said, but also always factoring in the regional infrastructure and challenges, kind of thinking about how to learn from each other, kind of moving forward with kind of chip diplomacy on green production. So that we really think about how can we, not only in terms of the resilience of the global supply chains and also not only about dependencies and managing dependencies, but kind of all these debates that are happening in like a different bubble, connecting it to green chip production and kind of expanding these partnerships. I think it would be extremely crucial also to make sure that we can hold companies accountable for their manufacturing practices by providing sound databases, data exchange mechanisms, and really thinking about what the data that we are right now measuring, like what it says, how this can be improved, and what we need to actually make sure that we also have a level playing field. Because specifically from a European perspective, we always hear companies talking about having competitive disadvantages because they have to follow more rules, there are more reporting directives, and there are more like stricter environmental regulations. And I think that doesn't really make sense in the longer term because we all have the challenge to become decarbonized, to act in a sustainable way, to transition our economies toward more circular economies. But if we want to take this seriously on a global scale, I think actions such as, for example, the Climate Club, where you see that like different countries are working together to think about or factoring in what does this mean on like a local, regional level, the policies we are thinking about, how can we enhance this, like push this forward together. I think that is something that we also need to do in the chip industry, because in the longer term, we will not achieve like a real green transition if we are only looking at like specific regions. And this also is kind of tied towards my like maybe more critical question of like industrial policies in the semiconductor industry. Like it's heavily subsidized. And I think we could maybe also not always think about how can we like make our location, our region attractive for semiconductor manufacturing, but also, yeah, think about what could be the stick. Like we have a lot of carrots, but what could be the stick? And for me, like one stick could be to say, for example, we have a minimum requirement regarding R&D expenses in sustainable manufacturing practices, R&D expenses in substitution of global warming and potential or high global warming potential materials, or the usage of renewable energy that is actually renewable. So stuff like that, where I feel like, okay, it could be like a minimum portion, but it would already signal that also from a policy perspective, you are taking it seriously. And if we are not taking it seriously, we shouldn't talk about circular economy, because kind of that will really transition and transform our industries, and is kind of in complete conflict with the dynamics and characteristics of the semiconductor industry. So if we are not like able to little by little move forward with our actions, we won't be able to really like successfully transition towards a circular economy.
All right, thank you, Julia. Finally, Gary.
Thank you. I'd probably focus, if I have one thing I'd change is to require and have it change how we're measuring. Right now, we're measuring different ways. Companies are measuring different ways. And some companies are doing the right thing in terms of trying to drive renewable energy deployment, and others are taking the easy way out. And everyone needs to be measured by the same yardstick. And I think regulators should be focused on that as part of their industrialization policy, require siting in places where you can secure renewable energy. For existing facilities, they should be measured in the same way. What's the transition plan away? Because if we have the current system that allows lots of different things to count as green, because all the companies want to be considered green, we're going to have more of the same, and it's going to drive more demand for fossil fuels, and it's not going to get us to circularity or any other things. It's going to be allowing claims to be green without any change on the ground.
All right. I think we're at time. Any burning last questions from the audience? If not, I want to conclude the session here. Please give a round of applause to our presenters. And thank you so much. And as a moderator, I do hope this is the beginning of a very critical conversation in the years to come. I think the chip will be with us for a long time, and we're increasing in scale. And I think these are really critical conversation. And for that, I hope you can stay a little longer to mingle, to network a little bit. And do we have any chips in the back? Maybe not. This is a chipless, no chips for the reception. We should bring all kinds of chips in the next session, chips from all over the world. Okay, and so. And for that, let's continue the conversation. Thank everyone for coming to attend the event today. Thank you very much.
So we are going to have a picture with yes. So ask Gary to stay. Okay.